The idea of adopting children with HIV or AIDS may at first seem unthinkable, but these two families want to show us that it's a doable situation and that there are many blessings to boot. Kiel and Carolyn Twietmeyer decided to adopt a child from India with special needs. Then, one day, while Carolyn was searching online for adoption agencies, she found Adoption Link. Carolyn called and talked with Mary Austin, a registered nurse and adoption advocate with the agency. It was Mary who first asked Carolyn if she would consider adopting a child with HIV.
I couldn't imagine that she would even bring that up to me. I was semi-insulted, to be honest with you, and I thought, you know, how can I endanger my own children? And so I hung up the phone with her, and I thought, well, I'll just look at the list. And I focused in on a sibling group of 3, and I looked at their ages, and I realized that the middle child was HIV positive, and I thought, you know, these kids are never going to get a family. It's just the saddest thing I ever heard. They're never going to get a family. I couldn't stop thinking about these 3 kids. I just knew I had to look back. So I called Mary back on the phone. I said, okay, send me a picture of these 3. And as soon as I saw them, my whole being just knew right then and there that those 3 kids need to be in my home.
Well, what did Kyle say when you talked to him about that?
The first time it was brought to me, I was working, and my wife called me at work, and then she says, honey, I have seen pictures of the 3 kids that are going to be ours. And I says, what did you say? She says, honey, I think that the kids we need to adopt are from Ethiopia. There's 3 of them. And I said, are you crazy? You know, what are you talking about? And she says, and one of them is HIV positive. I thought my wife must have lost her mind at home at this point. Great, the kids have drove her crazy now. She is really bona fide. And to tell you the truth, this is the first time my wife and I were at odds about anything, like really at odds, because I was just, you know, I was thinking financially, how could we do this? I had never heard of anybody, you know, adopting an HIV child, and my wife kind of just, she backed off a little bit, and she really went into prayer about it, and so did I. And it took me about 2 weeks, and during that 2 weeks, every single day I had somebody approach me about an adoption issue. Now these are complete strangers, and I'm on construction sites. You know, I have people coming up to me talking to me about adoption and stuff, and I'm like, you know, God is really telling me something. You know, I'm like, God, look, if this is your gig, then I need you to be crystal clear on this one. I mean, more so than ever, and he did.
Samuel was one of 14 million children living with HIV in an orphanage. When Kiel and Carolyn made a decision to adopt Samuel, along with his brother Seth and sister Rachel, they had no idea how this would change their family forever.
When we went to get the other 3 kids, we spent 2 weeks in Ethiopia, and one day I had brought Samuel back to Hope, his orphanage, to play with his friends. And I just sat around kind of and watched him play, and there was a little bit of a stir, and 2 social workers walked in with this child who looked like she just wanted to be swallowed into the ground. And I couldn't possibly imagine pain like what I saw emanating from this child. And I got up and I asked the social workers, you know, what the story was, and they had told me that they had just, they had lost their parents, Selah, and she had 2 siblings. They had lost their parents a year, and 2 years for the father and 1 year for the mother, and they were trying to survive out on the streets. The kids were all tested for HIV, and the older siblings were negative, and Selah was positive. So she had just literally found out she had HIV and been taken away from her brother and sister, you know, and brought into this orphanage. I couldn't believe it. I understood the devastation. I was adopting an HIV positive kid, but I didn't know it until I was in it. As time wore on, I realized that her health was getting worse and worse, and that nobody had even inquired about her, which is very common. You know, these kids, you know, they're the modern day lepers. You know, nobody, you know, is really looking to go get these kids, especially when they're older and now she's advanced in AIDS.
Today, 14,000 people will die from AIDS. The United Nations reports by the year 2010, 25 million orphans will be living with this virus. When we return, we'll meet Margaret Fleming, a mother who adopted 3 HIV-positive children.
Whether you're a student needing answers, a parent needing help, or a concerned citizen wanting to make a difference, Life Issues Institute has the resources you need to put your values into action. Life Issues Institute is an international educational organization committed to protecting innocent human life. Life Issues Institute knows what it takes. That's why millions throughout the world turn here for help. Life Issues Institute has authored more pro-life publications than any other entity in the world, and its materials are printed in over 30 languages. Radio broadcasts, newsletters, and a website filled to the brim with the answers you're looking for are just a click away. Go to facinglife.tv and click on the link to Life Issues Institute to find out more about how you can change the heart of a nation.
What happens to children who are orphaned after their parents die of AIDS? Often these children test positive for HIV and end up on the streets or in an orphanage. Margaret Fleming is the mother of 3 adopted children who have HIV. It all began when Margaret was reading an adoption magazine and was drawn to the picture of a little girl living in an orphanage in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. This little girl had HIV. Margaret knew she had to meet her.
It was in the hottest, least accessible floor of the orphanage. And all the other rooms there had fans, and they were sort of darkened to keep out the sun. And the children had toys and clothes and so forth. But in this particular room, there was nothing. There were no toys, no words. It was completely quiet. No joy. Nobody ever did anything except pick them up at arm's length, like this, and carry them to a changing table where they were kept clean and their bodily needs were taken care of. They were force-fed often, laying on the floor. The nurse or the nanny would hold the baby's nose and the baby'd throw up and they'd scoop it up and put it back in anyway. And they had HIV stenciled in black across the backs of their t-shirts. And it was like the Scarlet Letter. And I had already founded Adoption Link, which is our agency here. And increasingly we were working with very vulnerable children and placing children who were hard to place. And so it just kind of fit that we would have a program, an HIV positive children's program, and try to find adoptive families.
Since establishing Chances by Choice, Margaret and her staff have helped find homes for 56 HIV-positive children. Kiel Twietmeyer is one parent deeply impacted by his visit to an HIV orphanage. He and his wife Carolyn are now parenting 2 children affected by the virus.
Until you're there, you can't grasp what it's like to be in a room with kids that have a pretty terrible outlook on what their life is going to be, Until you're there, you just don't get it.
The issue of these kids with HIV and realizing still where they live now, the stigma is still unbelievable. Even within the medical field, even being in the hospital with Selah, every person that came in there with a white coat on would ask me, did you know about this before you adopted her? Just their skepticism was unbelievable. They would tell me time and time again, there's nothing that can be done. There's nothing that can be done for her.
But Selah has stage 4 AIDS, and that's quite different from HIV positive, right?
We were ready and willing, whatever it took, to have her here and to make her part of our family and to put her health where it needed to be. And we also felt at the same time, and we had quite a taste of it, I had a taste of it, especially in Ethiopia, that even if it meant that she wouldn't survive, that it was worth it, that didn't matter. We were going to get her, and we were bringing her here, and it didn't matter.
Just that she had hope, you know. She knew somebody was.
And in your mind, if she died with hope, that was as good as maybe you'd be able to do for her.
Yeah. When I went to Ethiopia, I didn't realize how severe the circumstances were, and she was like 32 pounds, and just it was something I didn't expect, because she changed so much in the year. From the time we had seen her, her body had just succumbed to what they call wasting syndrome,
And she had received no medication to this point?
she had medication. She went through both the available rounds of medication they have in Ethiopia. So she, as far as Ethiopia was concerned, and her caregivers and stuff, she didn't have any more options. She was finished. When we were there, she needed a blood transfusion. They would not give her blood from their blood bank because she's in stage 4 of AIDS, and to them there's no point in that. The only reason she was able to get blood was because my blood wound up being compatible with hers. So they were able to give her my blood, which brought her up, her hemoglobin level up, to be able to fly her home.
Wow.
Brought her up to past an 8, which is what was necessary to put her on an airplane. She would have died in flight otherwise. There was no way to bring her home at a 4.8.
In August of 2008, Selah came home with her new family, the Twietmeyers. Since that time, she's received the medical attention she needed to survive. Selah takes antiretroviral medications to stabilize her immune system. She's been surrounded with love from Carolyn, Kyle, and her 10 new brothers and sisters. If you were to meet Selah, you'd notice a glow in her eyes, a glow that brings a smile to your face, because she's getting a second chance at life that can't be measured. It can only be felt. When we return, we'll learn about the misconceptions regarding contracting HIV.
Thank you for inviting us into your home. Each week we feature real people who deal with real-life issues head-on. Some of their experiences are uplifting, while others will break your heart. But in the end, the message is clear. Those who follow biblical principles on the issues of life are blessed. Become a partner with us in providing a positive, life-affirming message to help change the way the next generation values innocent human life. Please consider a generous gift to help offset the costs of producing this important quality programming. You can donate on our secure website at facinglife.tv or by calling the phone number on your screen during normal business hours. Together, we can make a real difference for life.
After meeting the Twietmeyers and the Flemings, I talked with Mary Austin. Mary's a registered nurse and on staff at Adoption Link. I wanted to learn more about the education someone should obtain when considering adopting a child with HIV. Mary, help us separate fact from fiction regarding the transmission of HIV virus among people.
Well, the feeling is that it's very easy to catch, and when in reality, it's very difficult. It's a very fragile virus. And when you're dealing with children, you have to really work at it to catch it. You know, you're not likely to get it through casual contact or just day-to-day living with them. So you are always fighting this feeling that, you know, if someone has a skinned knee and you touch it, you're going to get it, and it's not true. It's not true at all. There has never been a case of household transmission.
Is there a learning curve for the parents who are in the process of adopting an HIV-positive child?
Well, there are, we see two kinds of parents. One that have done the research and come to us and say, I found a child that's HIV positive and we need your help in order to adopt them. We need to get them in this country and we don't know how to do it. Then there are a group of parents who will say, I feel like I want to do this and tell me about it. So there can be a learning curve. Even as a nurse, I did not work with HIV patients, and until I came here, I didn't know how doable this was.
What are some of the stigmas associated with HIV-positive children that you have to face in society today?
Well, the two main misconceptions that we deal with are, and this is what many, in fact I'd say most people believe, is that A, how can I adopt a child that's going to die? And B, how can I bring such a child into my family where he or she might infect everybody else? And from those two misconceptions come the stigma. The myth that it's that contagious is way off. The only time that children can transmit the virus to anyone might be in a blood spill situation. And therefore, universal precautions need to be taken. People need to put on gloves. We have plastic gloves in every room in the house and the glove compartment of the car. And everybody knows not to touch the blood with their bare hands, because if you did and you happen to have a cut in your skin, chances are 1 in 300, which is pretty low, but nevertheless it's real, that the virus could be transmitted.
Now, how is HIV transmitted from the mother to the infant?
Through the bloodline. Not all babies of HIV positive mothers will be HIV positive. There is only a percentage who will be, a small percentage. Those that are can be treated. If, for instance, you're in this country and when you go into labor, they treat the mom and then they treat the baby as soon as the baby's born. So it's very possible that they can catch it and that you can catch the mom while she's in labor, do the medical treatment, and the baby will not be HIV positive. The problem in third world countries is the stigma is so strong that the moms do not want to be tested and they don't want to know whether or not they're HIV positive. The other way that it becomes obvious is if you don't breastfeed your baby, because that's one of the primary ways that a newborn will get it. If you don't breastfeed the baby, then people around you believe you have HIV. So they do it whether they know they have it or not.
I understand that a child can contract HIV from the mother, but not actually get HIV. Is that correct?
Well, all babies who are born of an HIV positive mom will carry the mom's antibodies. And when in third world countries, they don't have the sophisticated tests that we have here in this country. So if they use a certain test, the ELISA test or the Western blot, then those are testing for the antibodies. And a newborn born of an HIV positive mom will have those antibodies. In this country, we have the PCR DNA test, which measures the babies. So within the first 4 months of life, you can usually get a definitive answer on whether or not the baby is positive.
When Kiel and Carolyn adopted Seth, they were told he was HIV positive. As time went on, Seth was monitored and they learned he's not carrying the HIV virus. Although his birth mother had AIDS, Seth didn't contract the virus. How often should a child that is HIV positive get tested?
Quarterly. 4 times a year. Usually what happens is they get on the ARVs, the antiretroviral drug regime, and they stabilize, and then they just monitor their blood 4 times a year.
So it's a simple blood test?
It is a simple blood test. Well, it's a test. It's 8 tubes of blood. It's not simple to get the blood, but yes, it is a blood test, and you can tell if the ARVs are working, and if they're not, then you change the cocktail. They combine several different drugs, and you can there's just an incredible number that they can keep combining in order to get a positive outcome.
Now, is there any problem with supply of these drugs in America?
No. This is such a doable thing. They say that that HIV is preferable to have over diabetes. It's that manageable.
Every morning at the Fleming house, Margaret prepares antiretroviral medications for each of her 3 HIV-positive children. Approximately 95% of the largest U.S. insurance companies cover the cost of these drugs. This can save a family between $10,000 and $15,000 a year spent on medication. With the advancement of antiretroviral drugs, the lifespan of a child living with HIV in the U.S. has greatly increased. Would you say that children orphaned by AIDS in other countries are being well cared for?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I think it varies. It depends on the attitudes and the resources of those countries and upon the availability of at least the first line of antiretroviral medications. It's getting a little better, but you know, people are afraid. And I'm always surprised by how one's attitudes toward HIV is stuck somewhere back in the 80s, where people will just say, oh, it's such a shame, these children are going to die, and and I'm not so sure they're going to die at all.
Do you talk to your children about the virus that they carry?
Oh, yeah.
What are those conversations like?
Well, they're not too long because they're so young. But my 4-year-old asked me not too long ago, so what is this HIV? Why do I have to take this icky medicine and Leon doesn't, for example? And so I think you have to give them age-appropriate answers. And I said, the best I could come up with, well, Luca, your blood is not strong. And so you take this medicine to make your blood strong. And he's like, yeah, like Spider-Man.